If there's a country that is romanticized by the rest of the world, it is France. But it seems like France romanticizes debt. And every few years, their national debt comes into question and is something that everyone talks about. In today's video, we look at how the French economy went from post-war recovery to being a massive debt crisis that it is today. Let's get started. The year is 1945, World War II has just ended and all of Europe is a mess and in ruins. The United States Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, comes up with a program of giving European countries a financial aid. The European allies get to rebuild while the American economy gets a boost from this increased amount of exports to all of the continent. You see, it's a perfect plan. This plan came to be known as the Marshall Plan, and under this plan, about 18 countries received financial aid from the America. And France was one of those countries. In fact, it was the second biggest recipient of all the financial aid that was given out by America, right after United Kingdom. And along with all of this financial aid, France came up with something known as
dirigism.
Took a while, but it got there. I can't pronounce this. Under this economic model, the government plays a very, extremely active role in the economy of the country, much like the Japanese economy, what gave it a post-war boom. Check out that video, links in the description below. But what exactly is
dirigism?
Unlike a free market economy where private companies drive the growth and are focused on short-term profits, the government gets to focus on long-term stability and national goals without ever having to worry about profitability because it's just tax money, they don't care. Since the government's not focused on short-term profits but on long-term stability, they can really play a positive role in curbing inefficiencies and market failures. They can step in where private firms wouldn't step in, and they can do things private firms won't do. Now, some of the commonly used tools are indicative planning, state-directed investments, and to use market instruments like taxes and subsidies in order to even influence the private companies to go in the direction that the government wants them to go in. If you incentivize them enough, the private firms will get there. But why did the government decide to go this GISM route? You see, even before the World War II, the French economy was, frankly speaking, a mess. There were a lot of small little businesses everywhere, which were not resilient to outside factors at all. And the government knew they need to fix this right away if the French economy was going to have a future. So first, the government used their indicative planning in order to plan where the economy needs to go. A lot of studies were done and a lot of discussions were had with industry leaders to see where and how can the economy be fixed, where does it need to go, and what are the needs of this very economy. And at the same time, the government chose what are known as national champions, certain big firms that the government can get behind and use those firms to provide stability in the economy. You see, all of that planning, research, and all of that was used to first of all pick these national champions. At the same time, these were used to make policies that can enable these national champions to go forward with the economy. You see, all these national champions get a lot of money. They're making a lot of profits because literally the government's enabling them to make money. And as a result, people of the country, they get jobs and the government gets a lot of taxes. Everyone's happy. This is something the South Korean government did as well, and that's a bit controversial. We'll look into that in a different video. If you want me to talk about it, leave a comment below. And if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and like this video. I'm dying over here, man. However, there were two key sectors, infrastructure and transport, that the government really wanted control on. So they decided to venture into these with their own government-funded companies. The French government owns National Railway, Utilities, Gas, National Airline, and Postal Service. Having all these companies under their belt allowed them to experiment with things and do things that the private sector just couldn't do. For example, France pioneered something called Minitel, which is a precursor to the internet. France had its own internet before internet was even discovered. And all of this was thanks to the fact the government was putting in all the effort and the money. They were sinking money to develop something. And it's this same government-first approach which has allowed France to become a nuclear powerhouse. About 80% of their electricity comes from nuclear energy. And at the same time, France was able to develop one of the best high-speed railway networks in all of Europe. Something a lot of the private firms wouldn't have cared to do unless they had endless amount of money. The government does. This post-war recovery was so awesome that it became to be known as
Les 30 Glorieuses,
or the Glorious 30, which means 30 years of prosperity and economic growth. French economy was growing like never seen before. However, like all good stories, this story was going to have a turning point as well. You see, by the 1960s, the economy was still growing, but the signs of stagnation were just under the surface. The unemployment was going up and people were starting to feel resentment towards their own government. In May 1968, France was rocked by major social unrest, driven by both political and economic frustrations. Despite economic growth, unemployment was rising, and the country's youth led massive protests. What began as student demonstrations spread across the nation, with strikes, university occupations, and factory takeovers that lasted 7 weeks. And as we all know, if French are known for something except their bagels and baguettes, it is their form of protest. It's one of the worst in the world. It's very serious when they protest. So, the government took this as a very serious threat to their stability. The president that came right after went on a spending spree. He spent on a lot of social welfare. His main focus was on social welfare, including subsidies for housing, healthcare, education, and other social services. Now, of course, with all these subsidies, the people and their living standards went up. People were happy, and the economy was still technically booming. Stagnation, as I said, was still under the surface. However, in order to fund all of these subsidies, the government didn't generate new income sources or anything. They just took more debt. And I guess at the time it made sense because the economy was doing just so good, they never thought that they'll have to worry about this debt. But they couldn't have been more wrong. You see, in 1973 came the oil crisis, which shook the world economy. The oil prices went up, that means energy costs went up, which also means production of things went up, aka inflation. People were not just buying things, which means the economies were struggling across the globe, and France was no different. Now, ever since then, the public spending of the French government has been increasing and has been going up. But they've just continued borrowing more money because it's cheap debt and they can just take more debt. And anytime there's been an economic recession where this debt becomes a concern,
at first glance, there's little sign of economic gloom. But the French are being called upon to tighten their belts.
it comes back into the news and everyone starts to talk about it. But recently it's become a very big issue. You see, in the year 2020, something big happened by the name of pandemic. As soon as the pandemic happened, it became a double-edged sword for the French economy. On one end, everything's shut down. The economy is not working at all. On the other end, people are at hospitals, they're dying, they're sick, and the government has to fund both. They have to stimulate the economy enough where they have to give people money in order to eat. At the same time, they're trying to subsidize people's healthcare and all the other expenses that came with the pandemic. And the last thing France needed was their war between Ukraine and Russia, which also increased the cost of living thanks to everything else getting pricier. However, this recent situation with the debt has been so bad that the European Union had to call them and go, "Brava, what are you doing? Look at Italy, they're doing better than you, they shouldn't be." There's a video about that I made, links in the description, check that out. They have their own issues, check it out. But anyhow, the current debt is so high that the European Union has given them a bit of an ultimatum, saying you need to get this under control or there will be consequences. At the end of the day, France has to kind of exist with all the other European countries and be part of the European Union. So what are some of the solutions France has? There are only two ways to reduce your debt. First, you reduce how much you spend. Something very hard to do when people who will vote for you don't like it. Second thing you can do is increase the amount of taxes you make, punishing the people. And that's again something people don't like, especially when French citizens are one of the highest taxed people in all of Europe. You see, it's a very hard situation to find yourself in as the president of the country. And that's exactly where the current president finds himself, Emmanuel Macron. Now, how France deals with all of this will have to be seen. Perhaps I'll be making a video about it in like 6 to 7 months as to what have they come up with and how successful have they been in turning around the economy. As of right now, people are pissed. The cost of living is high and they're still paying exorbitant amount of taxes. They just don't like it. Why are they paying all these taxes? Anyhow, that's it for this video. Unfortunately, it's not the best conclusion we wanted. We all like a solution at the end, but this one doesn't really have a solution because I'm not the president of France, unless you want me to be one. Anyways, that's it for this video. I'll see you in 2 or 1 week from now. Peace.